Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for Dr. Ayo Yetunde and Audel Salazar for hosting this event. Um, we welcome Dr. Yetunde for the second time, and we're so grateful for this. She is a law-educated pastoral counselor and a human rights activist. She's the co-founder of Center of the Heart and founder of Andres Spiritual Care for Women with Cancer. As well, she is the co-founder of the Order of Freedom and the Buddhist Justice Reporter, the George Floyd trials. She is also a community Dharma leader in the Insight meditation tradition and teaches pastoral care and counseling, has taught at University of the West, where I graduated from, and United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. And her bio goes on and on. And she's a writer, of course, and has written many, many articles. And the last book she has co-edited, as you know, is Black and Buddhist. And we have today another guest speaker, Audel Salazar. He attended the last part one of this series, and he was invited to present his research. He has a background in East Asian history and philosophy and currently works in higher education while studying to become a high school guidance counselor. When he's not reading, running, and meditating, he spends his time with his wife, son, and 2 dogs. So welcome, please welcome Dr. Yetunde and Audel Salazar.
Good day, everyone. And I'm really glad to be with you all. Thank you. Mostly today to support Audel Salazar. I met on April 8th. We were together last time. About whether what we've experienced in the United States in particular, as it relates to COVID-19, is an expression of genocide. And I think one thing that we learned from that conversation is that though we are, accustomed to thinking of genocide in particular ways, there is no limit to the mind and the activities and actions that can lead to the mass killings of people. It's not limited by what we know. And perhaps the way the COVID-19 pandemic has been in some ways neglected, ignored, manipulated, has resulted in mass death. So my objective today is to support Audel, who is going to offer part 2 of the conversation that we had in April. And part 2 of this conversation is titled "The Cheap Perfume of Not Racist and the Dharma of Antiracism." Audel, will you please show your slide with your beautiful son, Edwin? Yeah. So, we're going to have a conversation about heavy things today, right? I will facilitate Q&A after Audel's presentation, but I really wanted you to see this photograph because intellectually we know this, maybe in our lives we know this, but we may not know what goes on in the mind of men of color and their children. And Audel can speak to this, but I know for a fact that we want for our children the same things everyone else wants for their children. To live in a context that is free from hatred, or at least to have the ability to deal with hatred without becoming hateful. We want a long life for our children. We want our boys to not be seen as threats. And we want, look at the joy on Audel's face. We want joy in life and living. And one of the ways that we can have these things is through doing the work of anti-racism. So with that, I would like to introduce Audel to begin his presentation. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Ayo. It was very heartwarming. Thank you. So before, just so you guys know, this is Cheap Perfume of Not Racist and the Dharma of Antiracism. Like we said, we're continuing the conversation about the sanitized stench of genocide. And genocide comes in many different forms, not just through concentration camps or smallpox or anything like that. And it continues to this day. So before I say anything else about it, I just want everyone here to know, and I don't know who needs to hear this, but anyone can be racist. Racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities, and we can be racist one minute and anti-racist the next. The reason I say this is I've been doing these sort of anti-racist workshops for since last summer. If you were following any of the news last summer. And probably the biggest thing that white people have told me when I tell them this is they use the word liberating because they may have done something that they thought was racist and they would beat themselves up about it. So if you need permission, here it is. You're not racist because you said one thing or did one thing, okay? It's what you do next that counts and what you do from then on out. So I hope that helps somebody. It usually does. So next, the way I wanted to present this so it'd be easy to remember is I based it off the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. And I just reinterpreted it within the lens of racism, specifically anti-racism. So if you are a practicing Buddhist, you might be familiar with the Four Noble Truths. So the first one, racism exists. Instead of racism is a particular type of suffering that, especially in the United States, that's the context I'm going to speak within. 2, racism is caused by racist policies, and I'll speak more to this later. I know I was taught growing up that racism is caused by ignorance. And I know within Buddhism, we also say ignorance is one of the causes of suffering or the cause of suffering. And I'll explain that more. And 3, racism can end. There is hope. And 4, the path of anti-racism can end racism. So one of the big things during the last presentation were people were asking, okay, so what can I do? So I'm going to give you concrete action steps. There's no excuses for things that you can do after you leave this presentation, wherever you are in the world. Doesn't matter if you're in Brazil or the United States or Europe. So the first noble truth, before you can solve a problem, you need to acknowledge that a problem exists. This should go without saying, but it's really important, especially if anyone's following the news about critical race theory in the education system. That's a big topic right now. And we can go into that later during our conversation, but I wanted to bring up now as that's one of the racist policies that we can talk about. So this is probably something you've heard said before. Maybe you've said it. I'm colorblind, I don't see race. What that actually, the equivalent of that is I deny that racism and the suffering it causes exists. Which is why I wanted to say the first noble truth is racism exists. By saying I'm colorblind, you're invalidating the experience of people of color who don't have the same privilege, saying, oh, I'm colorblind too, I don't have to see race, even though that is projected upon them regardless of their choices. The other excuse you probably heard is I'm not a racist. There's something I also want you to take from this presentation today, is that the opposite of racist is not a racist, it's anti-racist. When you say I'm not a racist, you acknowledge that racism and the suffering it causes exists, but it doesn't cause me suffering, so it's not my problem. And so you're saying, as I'm not actively participating in anything that's considered racist or harmful, but I am not at the same time doing anything to mitigate it or lower it or alleviate the suffering that you may be experiencing. So I think that's important, that these two phrases of I'm colorblind or I'm not a racist, you realize how racist and harmful they can actually be to people, because racism is not objective. It is a subjective experience, and it differs from person to person. And as Ayo was saying, we can't always see within other people's minds. So the second noble truth, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Buddha, his first teaching, it's called the first turning of the wheel. And so he described samsara as like a wheel of existence. So I also wanted to describe racism as a wheel. And you'll see the first turning at the top is power, and then racist policies, racial inequity, and racist ideas. So policymakers design racist policies for their own benefit, producing racial inequity that is justified by racist ideas. As I said earlier, we may have been taught that racist ideas are actually the ones that turn the wheel and starts this whole process. The reason for that is that equality is about equal rights, but equity is about equal access to resources. So if you have been following along with the news, especially last summer, there wasn't a lot of talk about like equal rights or equality or anything about that. The word that came up a lot and is still being used is equity. And yes, we may all be treated the same on paper, according to some words, but we may not be able to have the same access to our own defense counsel if we go to court, or the same opportunities that other people have. So I want you to not to think in terms of rights, but in terms of, okay, I have access to this. Does the same person have the same access, depending on where they live or on their income? So to better illustrate that, especially for the third noble truth, I want you to take a look at this picture. And on the left, you see that's what equality looks like. No one's going to argue that we don't have the same equal rights, right? It's enshrined in our law now, for however much that is worth. But equity is about equal access to all the resources. Obviously, the adult doesn't need the box to stand up to see the baseball game, but the smallest child does. So that's the best way, because I'm a visual person, that's the best way I can visualize the difference between equality and equity. So equality is not the problem. Equity is the problem. And individuals are not the problem. Policies are the problem. So as much as we'd like to blame the man for standing on that box, who gave the man the box? And can we give it to another person who needs it more? And so the simplest way to put this in action for anything, the next time you read the news, if you do, I'm taking a fast from the news right now. You are either racist or anti-racist. There's no neutrality. So something's either providing access for certain groups of people or all people, or it's not, or it's restricting access. So just look at it through that lens the next time you read the news. So finally, the fourth noble truth. We're wrapping it up. As I said, I'm going to give you concrete things to do as soon as this presentation ends, more than I've already given you. So 3 things to do right now. Okay, red light, stop. Stop saying or allowing other people to say, I don't see color or race, or I'm not a racist, or I can't be racist. I love that one. To deny and defend racism, the suffering it causes. Racism exists, it's real, and it's hurtful, regardless of how far we've come. Yellow light, slow the mind down and confess the racist ideas we sometimes express. Especially if you do sit in meditation or zazen. You know, a lot of this racist conditioning, these racist ideas come to us in childhood when we have very little influence about what influences us and stays with us. So don't beat yourself up if you do think, you know, any racist thing. The best example I can give is I had an English teacher who was from the Congo. So she was African. She was Black African. And she was going to her car at night and a Black man was walking by. She immediately locked her car just like that. And then she was like, wait a minute, why did I do that? And it's because, all the movies I watched that have Black people in them, Black men specifically, portrays them as criminals or someone that might hurt me. This was back in the 90s, but she was still like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. So anyone can have those thoughts or actions. But it's being honest and aware about those thoughts that we can start to change them. And finally, green light, go. If there's one thing that, if any of this stuff resonated with you, I would strongly recommend that you go read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, and discuss it with others. Cough, Jeff, Yoshin. You know, we can talk to each other and then we can figure it all out if anyone wants to start a discussion group or anything. But this is probably the best book that I've learned about to do more with the information, whereas other books kind of just give you this stuff and there you go, now go change the world. If only it was that easy. So I've also included a Buddhist anti-racist reading list. You might notice the last book on that list is familiar. But I will give these slides to Miyoshin so she can share them with you all. So if you specifically wanted Buddhist anti-racist literature to read, here it is. And that is all for my sharing. Yes, thank you, Jeff. He has the book.
Thank you very much, Audel, for your presentation, which is concise, beautifully presented, comprehensive enough, inviting enough, and I hope instructive enough to give people permission to claim what's theirs without shame, recognizing that in this culture, we are all subjected to the same culture, regardless of how we look, all of us. And that there are little things that we can do in our relationships when we hear also the cultural expression of not claiming that we're part of this culture, racist culture, and also providing easy steps and a short reading list that we can jump into and read with one another if we choose to. So thank you. And so now let's open up the floor for questions and comments. if you have a question, please raise your electronic hand. And if you don't know how to do that, just raise your hand. I think that we're small enough where we might be able to see your hand raised. If you have a question, try your best to come to your question, come to your point without engaging in an aria, or a long story, so that everyone on the call has an opportunity to ask their question.
How do you raise hand? I don't have a raise hand thing here, do
You can go, I think,
Give you a
well,
reaction.
don't worry. Do you have a question, Lorraine?
I thank you. I just wanted to express my thanks and appreciation for offering this dialogue in direct relation to the Four Noble Truths. I think it's a really interesting way to expand this, anchor it not only according to sacred texts and traditions, but to offer it in a way that's very relevant and applicable. And as I'm sitting here listening, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we could also apply these truths to issues of gender discrimination and a whole variety of other specific areas of suffering in the world in a very directed fashion. I really appreciate that targeted approach. Thank you.
Thank you for your words of appreciation, Lorraine. Do you happen to have a question, or no need if you don't have
No,
one?
no,
Okay.
just gratitude. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine.
Jeff,
Carolyn.
did you raise your hand? Oh,
Jeff, then Carolyn.
Jeff, then Carolyn? Is that what you said?
Yes.
I'll wait for Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you, and I need to change my name so that you know that it's me. There's a question here, and the question is going to be, what's your recommendation about how to respond? And the setup to this, as we all know, and I want to try to keep from being, divisively, positionally political here, but the right wing will grab onto a topic, whether it's socialism, whether it's, whatever it is. And the topic du jour it now is critical race theory. And they are all spouting commentary about critical race theory, making it a boogeyman, as if we're teaching this to second grade kids in public schools. And we all know that that's not true. There's virtually nothing true about what they're saying, but they have a forum. They have the largest news outlet in the country. Last evening, Christopher Rufo, who is one of these political spokespeople speaking out against critical race theory, was with Joy Reid on MSNBC. She did a good job of standing up and refuting what he was saying. When it was a cascade of lies. Jelani Cobb came on afterwards, and Joy asked Jelani, how do you respond to that? And he said, I don't even know where to start. There's just so many lies within this. So I don't want to make a speech. My question really is, this is out there, and gullible, underinformed, I'm trying to be kind, Americans are hearing this stuff. And just like with the Red Scare, when I was when I was born.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
Would you mind asking your question?
Well, how do you recommend we respond to this?
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And also, Audel, would you please, before answering Jeff's question, if you know the answer to this, can you explain what critical race theory is, in case there's anyone here who doesn't know?
yeah, I'll give a brief summary, I guess.
Yeah.
Critical race theory is founded by actually a lawyer. Her name was Kimberly Crenshaw, and you may know her from the term intersectionality, if anyone has ever heard that term before, which is huge because she finally put a name to everything. Critical race theory is really a way to look I don't like this is redundant, but to look at race through a critical lens, whereas before people would look at it through kind of surface level, looking beyond just individual explicit acts that you might see on TV, like Jeff was saying, and asking, well, why is this possible? What allowed this to happen? And why do these people feel comfortable enough? Refuting critical race theory, for instance, that's the best example I can give. I don't really know a concise definition.
Let me just add a little bit using your example of equity and equality. So from my understanding, critical race theory coming out of legal education had to do largely with these so-called neutral laws. Right? These laws on the face, they don't mention anything about race. They give the impression that everyone will be treated equally under the law. But then when you look at the impact of the law, then you see that in some of these situations, people of color are impacted differently, usually negatively, almost always, compared to people who are not people of color. And so then when the criticism, if you will, from the perspective of people of color brings to light the impact, then the question is, what are the policies then that can be used to further that impact or bring some healing to the impact or change it? So that's sort of how it bubbled up. And then back to Jeff's question, with people jumping on CRT, critical race theory, as the boogeyman, I think that's the word that you used. Having the forum to scare people, having the power, thinking about the circle that you use, Audel, the circle power up here to impact policymaking. How do we respond to this phenomenon?
Do you want me to answer?
I think
okay.
Jeff posed that question to you and I interrupted. Okay. I'm sorry.
So to continue off what she was saying about critical race theory, to help you give context, I'm a few years younger than some of you, and it was really a response to this color blindness that was kind of all the rage back then. Critical race theory was essentially saying, no, racism is not over yet. Race still matters. It still exists. So if that helps. And part of the reason is that the right wing is so against it is you have to acknowledge a problem for it to exist. Like I said, critical race theory shines a bright spotlight on the problem of racism. And if we can get rid of that spotlight, then, it's not that big of a problem. The best thing to do, especially within the context of the wheel of racism, I mean, what I usually tell people is begin within your own sphere of influence and then work outwards from there. I think engaging in this this seminar right now with the Zen Peacemakers is great because we're connecting with people from all over. And this is something that until the last conversation with Ayo for part 1, I didn't even realize that, I could talk to people about this stuff and therefore expanding my reach. And so, I'm sure you've heard all the redundant answers before about how to combat this, but you really do matter, and what you say matters. I was at the Holocaust Museum a few years ago in DC, and it's like, what you say matters was on the t-shirt, and it's true. I had talked with Ayo after part 1 about, how could something like the genocide in Germany happen with the Holocaust? And it's because it wasn't because a majority of the German people were for exterminating Jews or Catholic priests or homosexuals. It was because the majority of people were silent. And so I hope that you use your voice and that you don't remain silent. So that's the best answer I give right now.
So let me, if you don't mind, I'm taking facilitator privilege real quick. Jeff, what do you think is the appropriate response for Zen Peacemaker International and people who say we are about witnessing and the alleviation of suffering? What do you think is an appropriate response? And then we'll
That's
go to Carolyn.
yeah, that's a really good question, and I would have, you know, and again I'll try to be concise. Sorry for running on before. I would have two different answers. One would be, you know, for me personally, and then one would be for the organization. And we are very careful to, you know, to avoid taking fixed positions. You know, Bernie said, you know, that he never attended a demonstration. So, in the context of Zen peacemakers, I honestly don't know what the answer is in terms of getting into the, you know, the weeds, or into a debate, as Joy and Jelani did last night, with somebody about this who's lying. Um, Personally, I would engage, and I don't have a very good answer for you. I'm sorry.
Okay, I wasn't expecting a particular answer.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sorry.
Thank you. Okay. Carolyn.
Yes, actually, my question is very similar to Jeff's. I liked your 3 things to do right now, Audel. However, it sounds so easy. And the very first one, stop allowing others. I mean, you know, stop saying it yourself. Okay, that's easy. Stop saying it yourself. That's easy. What's not easy is if others say it. Now, I have to admit, in the last year and a half, the people I'm surrounded with and the groups that I'm with, don't say that. But now that we're going to be going out into the world for the first time in a year and a half, I'm trying to imagine if someone says this, and I think it's like you say, it's commonly said. I mean, years ago it was very commonly said by all of us liberals. You know, I'm colorblind, I don't see color, I'm not racist. But is there a quick response? You know, I have a hard time formulating what I would say, frankly. I without feeling pompous, superior, you know, I'm going to teach you about this. Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, Carolyn, that's I was hoping someone would actually ask that question, so thank you. I'll just say this. I know it's I don't know how much of Buddhism I want to draw into this answer, but when you're thinking about this now, before we even get to that, where you're in this particular situation, like maybe you're at a party, ask yourself right now, why are you feeling these or having these thoughts of, oh, I'm going to be pompous, or I don't want to be confrontational, or it's uncomfortable or something? Because usually, like I said, what allows racism to persist isn't because there are a lot of racists. It's because there are a lot of people who don't do anything about it. And it usually starts with their thoughts and feelings. Oh, it's better not to rock the boat. Recently, I read a quote that was like, we're not all in the same boat. We're all in the same ocean, but some people are on a yacht and others are on a lifeboat. And I was like, oh, that's it. So I thought that was great. But something that I learned, a very quick response that's as non-combative as possible. I'm not guaranteeing this will work. And I have used it before, and it's be ready for the awkward, you know, pause. You know what I'm talking about, especially if it's Thanksgiving or Christmas. Is I asked the person, I'm like, please don't say that. That makes me very uncomfortable. When you say I'm not a racist or something. This puts the ball in their court, because now how are they going to respond? Because they're like, if they care about you, they're like, oh, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Or they'll engage in some kind of dialogue. And that's where I think it's important. I've noticed a huge difference since, I like to thank Jeff and the Zen Peacemakers, but since I've been sitting for over a year, since the pandemic started, sitting Zazen. And that's allowed me to really take a step back mentally. Whereas before I might have been quicker to jump the gun. So I don't know if you practice meditation, but that is, just not knowing and bearing witness to what they're saying. So even if it's just that short sentence, I'm not guaranteeing there's not going to be awkward or something, but racism is not comfortable. I don't know who is comfortable for it, but it's not comfortable for me. And so, yeah, it's the best I got.
Thank you. Carolyn, do you have a follow-up before we go to the next question?
Well, just to, when you bring up Thanksgiving, which I wasn't present for this past year, but that's exactly the kind of situation that I'm picturing with family that I wasn't in contact with so much over the past year and a half. And yes, it will, if I can bring myself to say it, I get short of breath just thinking about it, but it will be very uncomfortable, but it's terrific. Thank you.
Yeah. And before we go to Jose's question, Jose, is that right? Okay. May I offer a middle way approach? Middle way approach might be, how is it in this racist society you were able to work through not becoming a racist? Because I would like to do the same. Okay, Jose.
Not to have too much of a comment here, not a question, but certainly to take the approach, and I think this is what Audel's speaking to, and yourself, the non-dual wisdom and the unattached engagement. So when someone has said something that in itself is causing harm, just because it is being expressed, if no other reason, that we automatically, of course, go into subject and object. I am the subject hearing the object, and I am offended. And now I need to do something about it. So I think to use the non-dual wisdom to recognize that you are in a moment of something that is occurring, to use the phrase, neither same nor different. You're not apart from this. You're in the midst of the chaos. You're in the midst of the crisis right now. And that's where the Bodhisattva wisdom moves forward into the unattached engagement. So to say to that person, stop, what does that accomplish? But to experience what is going on and to maybe at that point take the conversation and say how you are a racist. I am a racist, and I do this all the time. And this is what I notice in myself. And so instead of talking to the person, talk to yourself. And now that other person becomes the subject and you become the object. You see what I'm saying?
Thank you, Jose. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
You are, thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you. Non-dual wisdom.
Unattached engagement.
Unattached engagement.
It's just another way of saying the three tenets.
Okay. Maybe we can return to that because sometimes I have questions about that. Okay. In a Black body, I have a question about that. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Myoshin.
If you want to go ahead and ask about what Jose said, that'd be good. But if not, I am curious about your word choice of genocide, which is a powerful word. And since this is also a continuation of that dialogue, could you both, you and Audel, expound on that choice of word?
Thank you. Audel, do you want to begin?
Yeah, I can start. Real quick about Jose. I was hoping someone would bring that up, especially for Buddhists, for white Buddhists especially. I've heard this before. And I would just like to say, you know, racism is dualistic thinking. And that's what I was trying to get across to Carolyn is, you know, the practice of whether it's the 3 tenets or just meditation. It is trying to do that unattached engagement. I like that word. I'm going to start using it. Because usually it's a visceral reaction that I would normally have to such things. But I was specifically giving the example to Carolyn because I'm like, she was already getting short of breath just thinking about it. I was like, oh man, I don't know. So if you feel comfortable talking about how racist you are, that's fine. Or an example. You know what I'm trying to get at. But the reason, and this came up in the last conversation too about genocide, about how people say it is such a powerful word. What's going on now, we had talked about the COVID, the disproportionate rates of people who became infected with COVID and how more people of color were likely to get COVID. Genocide is the killing of a people. That's the literal meaning of the word. When most people think of genocide, they take the academic definition, which is the systematic killing of people or group of people. And what I always like to remind people about, and that they don't know, is that the Nazis, when they were planning to kill the Jews through their extermination camps, it didn't start out systematic. It started out similar to what was happening in the United States last summer and summers before that. Riots, someone getting hit by a car, fighting over monuments. If you ever look up the history about it, it doesn't have to be systematic. It's accumulation of acts. One time Jeff said something. I think it was Rick Santorum said something. You know, he was saying, him and other right-wing politicians, they're saying the quiet part out loud. That's how genocide starts, when you're saying the quiet part out loud, and it goes from words to actions until they finally systematize it into what we saw in World War II with the extermination camps. So yes, genocide is a powerful word, but so is racism. And I would, you know, ask people to not minimize it in comparison to genocide, that they both carry the same weight, and that what's going on now is similar, not just in the United States, but across the world to different groups of people. Thank you.
Let me share these numbers as it relates to COVID-19. In the United States, 33,395,620 people are known to have been infected with COVID. That's just, we don't know about the unreported. Over 33 million. 600,086 people in the United States, and probably a lot more, have died. Throughout the world, 180,493,835 people known to have contracted COVID-19. 3,908,682,000 people known to have died of COVID. And this does not reflect the rise of numbers in different places, right? I know that we don't have the capacity throughout the world to catch the contraction of COVID at the moment and get that number and put it in a database, right? So many of these cases and deaths could have been preventable. And the reason why I use the word genocide is because I saw with my eyes, I heard with my ears the policies that came out after it was known that Black and brown people in the United States were impacted differently. And so that's why I use the word genocide. And also I am informed by the fact that wherever we find ourselves, if typically there is a population of indigenous people and there is a history of white people settling, right, being settlers, and you see that the indigenous people are not leading, they are not policymakers in the country, then there's a history of genocide that we are working with and hopefully against the perpetration of the energies that found in many of the countries that we live in right now. Those are just a few of the reasons why I use the word. Thank you. I think Sandro has a question. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah,
Thank you, Sandro.
thank you. I want to ask for you both, Pamela and Audel, what you can suggest, because sometimes I think in even in Brazil we have a very white Sangha, and sometimes it's a little difficult to attract indigenous and Black people, because if those people don't see indigenous and Black people in those sangs, it's some difficult to get in. So what can you, Pamela and Aldo, suggest for us to make this contact and this kind of integration more possible? Because sometimes I think it's a little difficult to think in ways that really works in this direction. So if you can help, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Audel, I'm always going to defer to you first, so just know that.
Gotcha. Actually, Sandro, Ayo actually wrote an article about this in Lion's Roar. If I find it, I'll send it to you. About BIPOC and Sanghas. So first of all, let me say, I know what you're talking about, because the group that I sit in right now virtually is almost all white. Jeff can correct me on that if I'm wrong. No, thumbs up. Okay. And then like even so I'm currently getting my master's to be a school counselor, and almost everyone in my cohort is white as well. Overwhelmingly female. That's one of the trends of education. It's white and female. But the biggest thing before you even do anything or take any steps, I want you to just ask yourself, if I was a person of color, why wouldn't I want to come to this Sangha? And I think that'll tell you a lot. Maybe you already know the answers. So that's where I would start, but I'll try and find that article by Ayo.
Sandra, thank you for your question. And I don't live in Brazil. I've never been to Brazil. But what I've heard about Brazil is that it's much more ethnically and racially integrated than the United States. And that's been depicted on TV and so on. I don't know if it's true. But if it is true, and then I walk into an all-white Sangha, whereas I've been living in a town or a city where people are mixing, I'm imagining I might find that strange. Like, right? Why is this all white when mostly how we live is all together? I don't know. But I wouldn't worry about it so much. Not that you're expressing a lot of worry, but I'm thinking that there may be a lot of things like African-centered religions, I think, are bigger in Brazil than they are in the United States. Catholicism, right, is a big presence in Brazil. It is in the States, but I think maybe it's more centered in Brazil. But I would say this, no matter where we are, if what we're talking about in Sangha is not relevant to the suffering of the people who come, there would be very little reason for them to return. So it would behoove us to ask visitors, what led you to come here? You know, what are you working with these days? And say that, you know what, we will endeavor to meet you there. We will endeavor to meet you there. And then mean it, right? And be committed to that for everyone without discrimination. What do you think needs to be done or said? Sandra?
Well, I think I think there's some things that we could do. First of all, I think the most sanghas I have gone here in Brazil, we have to not make racism a taboo, something that's not can be talked about, because if we don't talk about that, we never see the suffering that this kind of thing makes to the people. So it's very difficult to, because sometimes I feel that the persons have the tendency to see, well, we have the same nature, the same enlightened nature, so a black person is the same thing of a white, the same thing of a tree, and something like that. So I think I feel a very very worried about it, because if we don't avow to make the suffering stops for every being, we have to look for this kind of suffering and not act like this suffering does not exist. So I think it's the first thing that we have do to start to start this work. Another thing, it's to put the retreats more cheap, because we have to make it possible for persons of different kind of classes to go to these retreats and speech, this kind of thing. But I really appreciate your advices, and I will read the the text that others sent.
Thank you,
Certain.
Sandra. Thank you,
Thank you.
Sandra. Yeah, I think it is really important to not make retreats so expensive, to make them accessible. And one way that I think we can do that is maybe have a model that says a retreat doesn't have to look a particular way. In the United States, we have wonderful retreat centers, but they're on expensive land. The buildings are expensive to maintain. The teachers are, we try to support them. So if you can find a way to hold a retreat that doesn't require you to sell your children or your mother or anything like that, people can have a wonderful experience with one another without a lot of expense.
I would just like to follow up with that real quick. That's
Okay.
part of the reason I joined Zen Peacemakers was exactly for the meditation cost retreats. I'd actually founded Quantum Zen first. They're a Korean Zen school. And I'd found them online first. And then I found Zen Peacemakers. So yeah, I understand.
Yeah, the Buddha had one tree. So, Jose, before you ask your question, let me see if there's anybody who has been wanting to speak but has been hesitant to do so. Yeah. Okay, Jose.
I just shared this phrase on the chat, and I put this to the both of you on this issue of the inclusion and pluralism within inside of Sangha. That I guess the framework of the question is this not what the plunge that we practice in ZPO and ZPI?
Since you defer to me, Ayo. Yes, Jose, it is. That's the other reason I joined Zen Peacemakers was because I saw they do a Native American plunge. I'm Native American. I was like, what? I wasn't able to join this year. I have a son who's 18 months, so I can't leave him right now. But I was like, yes, these people seem to be doing what I think, Zen Buddhists should be doing beyond. There's a center here where I live, and I'm just like, let's just say it might be more what Sandro's used to in Brazil. So.
And I'm brand new to ZPI. But I tell you what appeals to me is this bearing witness. Bearing witness, from my point of view, requires courage. Courage to be in the places and see what's there. And where a lot of people would prefer not to see it. And will even actively act to pretend like it's not there, and may even make moves to erase, right? And I think we know that happens. For example, was it January 6th when people stormed the US Capitol? Not that long ago. And shortly thereafter, the history started being rewritten and reinterpreted. Like I said, even the words, an insurrection. Why is it an insurrection here and a coup attempt somewhere else? Why do we not want to have an investigation? And why are we not holding people accountable? Certain people, So there is often an effort to erase from history, rewrite history, recast it, reframe it in a way that I say not witnessing people would prefer. Not witnessing people prefer. So ZPI to me holds out the promise of clear seeing, and clear observing, so that we can speak clearly about what we witnessed with the hope, with non-attachment, unattached engagement, but also with a sense of hopefulness that what we convey will be received and taken to inspire others to refrain from the atrocities that we are talking about. I hope that's the reason for it. Otherwise, I don't know if I would participate just to hold that and not share it with others. Mioshin, another reason why I want to mention genocide as a strong word, because in the United States, there seems to be, I would say, collective denial that genocide could happen in the United States right now. And so I come with strength and then hope that people will challenge me if I'm wrong about it. Yeah, thank you.
I would just like to follow up with that by saying, if you research any of the genocides that have occurred in the world, they also didn't think that would happen there.
Suddenly became silent here. We're all contemplating the deep wisdom shared here. Do you have any other comments or insights or questions that you might have for each other or for Ayo and Audel?
Mioshin, I think probably one of the most profound things was the silence that we just experienced. I'm guessing that we understand the part of the psychological dynamic that takes place when we don't want to believe that something horrible has happened. It's part of human nature to not want to believe my loved one has died, right? That's just right. Stages of grief. We don't believe things could get as bad. We're a democracy. How could authoritarianism take root in a democracy like the United States? But here we are. Mm-hmm. What brings us back to reality? And how can we stay grounded in the horrors? I don't know any other organization like CPI. Jose.
A question back to you still on this. If the mountain will not come to Muhammad, then Muhammad must go to the mountain. Substituting the words mountain and Muhammad for the Black practitioner and the Sangha. One of the problems that we have in our Sangha is then Muhammad must go to the mountain, otherwise the Sangha must go to the Black practitioner, is not to bring whiteness to the mountain. Otherwise, when Muhammad must go to the mountain, don't go as whiteness, go as Sangha. And so please expound on that, like how to be careful, how to be aware.
So maybe I'll do it. This could be a Zen koan. How do you define whiteness? Right? Question with a question. And then after you define that, like what it means to you or what you think your Sangha is portraying as whiteness. Because like I've seen it in other places I visited where I didn't feel included. So I didn't want to go back And a part of me, there's another great article on Lion's Roar. I'll share it. It's about a Black Zen practitioner, and she's sweeping the floors in her Zendo, and she gets really angry because she's like, my ancestors were slaves and they would sweep floors, and now they're just trying to make me do the same thing. And it's like, right, it's all attachment. But like the people who asked her to sweep the floors did not think, oh yeah, we're being racist or we're trying to make her relive generational karma or something. So just when you say bring the Sangha, like, so what is the whiteness that you're bringing with the Sangha? Like, what attachment do you have? Because that's not saying change the way you dress or change the way you talk. It's not what we're saying. Just ask yourself, am the way I'm behaving, or is that inclusive? Do other people want to be around me, regardless of race? Do they just want to be around me and talk to me? So I would start there.
Yeah, Jeff, please.
I don't want to be pedantic about this, but I want to insert just really quickly some information, some fact. We had a guest a few weeks ago that Myoshin arranged, Chen-Ching Han, who's a PhD from Stanford, talking about Asian American Buddhists. Fact of the matter is, about 1% of Americans self-identify as Buddhist. So let's call that north of 3 million people. 2/3 of those American Buddhists are Asian Americans. So, and I've fallen into this before too. I live in Boulder, Colorado. This is Whiteville, and all the sanghas that I'm related to here in Boulder are very, very white. And I always think about, where are the Black sangha members here? The real question is, where are the Asian sangha members, and why are our sanghas so separate? I don't expect anyone to answer that, but I just want to make sure that we have that in mind when we talk about American Buddhism. So thanks.
Right. And also talking about genocide and maybe near genocide, the internment, right? That's also mixed up in Buddhaphobia, if you will, right? Buddhaphobia from a Christian point of view, a suspicion, non-Christians who are also Japanese. That is part of our history and maybe has some connection to what you're talking about, Jeff. Only white people can answer this question about whiteness and what white, yeah, right? I can't, but I can say what I hear in Jose's question about whiteness is the history of apartheid in all its forms throughout the world. We're here. We're going to claim what we want, and the rest of you will live outside the periphery of the world that we create here. So when you enter into the Sangha as a person of color, and you're entering into an all-white Sangha, and you get that glance that says, oh, what are you doing here? You, right? It gets interpreted as, oh, I don't belong here. Take a moment. Don't let that glance, don't let that moment define the potential for relationship, right? Don't let it just go by. Know that we are conditioned in this way, and that we are not going to let our conditioning dictate how we're going to relate to each other from this point forward. Two people have their hands raised. Okay, before you speak, let me just make sure for people who haven't spoken yet. Is there anyone who's been thinking about something? Is it bubbling up? You know, it's bubbling up. I wonder if anything is bubbling up for Linda or Sherry or Sasha or Bob or Ken or Susan or Carol. Anything bubbling up, y'all? Okay, Jeff.
Thank you. No, but I have to
Oh,
leave,
Susan.
and thank you for a wonderful, challenging conversation.
Thank you, Susan. Hey, Susan, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Jeff? Nope. Jose?
On the comment of being careful when you take the whiteness to the person you're trying to go to, I was thinking more of the aspect of whiteness wants to save people. And when we take the Sangha to the people, it's to take the Dharma. And of course, we want to attach to the Dharma. We want to, it's ours, it's the truth. And we are going to save you. So that's a whiteness.
Mm.
And again, I think
Yes.
going back to the plunge concept is to engage in the plunge in such a way that you're not there to save. I think about the paramita of Dana. That it's one thing to give and to receive. It's another thing to recognize that there's nothing to give, there's nothing to receive, there's no giver, there's no receiver. It's to reach that point again of that you're just in the moment. There's really no act of giving, there's no act of receiving. You're just in the moment where something is happening. But we're so far away from the perfection of such things. and we approach this like, oh, we don't have any people of color in our Sangha. We must have people of color in our Sangha. Now that's a noble, that's good. That's Dana. But we need to be careful that we're not doing it because we're out to save. And that's a very white thing. Whites love to save.
Ooh, you just threw it down. You threw down the gauntlet on that one, Jose. You threw it down. You threw down the mic. You threw everything down on that one, on that, on that statement. Yeah, because the saving is not saving, is it? What is it? Let's get into let's get into the nature of that for a moment. What is that?
I think it's a blatant act of selfishness.
Jeff.
I'll confess. And going from the macro to the micro, my personal relationship, I've had to learn in my closest personal relationship that there are times that Sandy doesn't want or need me to fix it. And I don't know if this relates, but I think it does. I think it does. My tendency, and here's my confession, my tendency is to listen, think that I'm listening very deeply, but then be churning up some real good ideas to fix it. And it's not necessarily out of kindness or compassion. It's to make me more comfortable because I hate it when she's upset. I hate it when she's in distress. I want it to stop. And so I agree with Jose. I think it's ultimately selfish.
Mm-hmm. Who's Sandy, by the way?
My wife.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Right. So you want to feel comfortable.
Well, I see that going on underneath the surface, and I've learned not to do that anymore. Yeah. But that tendency is there. That fix it tendency is there. I don't know where it comes from.
Well, I in part it comes from the delusion that others are broken, or are right, or inherently weak, frail, in need of something that only we can provide because we have it. You know, lately there's been a few news reports about finding hundreds of children's remains buried under a school in Canada, right? But the whiteness, taking children from the families of Native American people, Aboriginal people throughout the world, taking children from their parents, placing them in boarding schools, teaching them whiteness, teaching them to denounce the people and heritage through which they were born, is what I think Jose is talking about. It is viewing people as sick and broken that only whiteness can fix at all costs. So to separate children at the border, to separate children from their parents, that ain't nothing new. People were outraged, but that ain't nothing new. It was horrible then, it's horrible now. And that, if I recall correctly, that was the first time there was outrage across the board. Oh no, the United States is not about that. That's cruel. That needs to stop. That needs to stop. We were pretty much in agreement about that. And divided on pretty much everything else. Is that genocidal? Is it genocidal now that we know that COVID has, for those of us who have survived up to this point, to know that COVID has reduced the life expectancy of Black and brown people by several years? Is that genocide? Does genocide have to mean the immediate erasure and death of people, or can it be slow? Can it be a slow erasure as to go undetected?
I'll add to that, Ayo. The genocide against Native Americans here in the United States is actually twofold. It's two parts. Usually people think the first is the settler colonialism, right? That's the first one, smallpox, all that stuff. The second is the cultural genocide through boarding schools, because the US government decided, okay, phase one failed, kill the Indian, but we can kill the culture. And so once again, I want to explain to you, genocide isn't just about systematic killing of people, because people is more than just our bodies. It's also our minds and everything we do.
Thank you. So I want to add, I'm getting all riled up. Y'all get me riled up. I need to be quiet. The best way to quiet me down is to ask a question, especially people who haven't spoken yet, if you have a question. ZPIers, do you call yourself ZPIers? Okay, I'm going to call you ZPIers affectionately. Okay. ZPIers are anti-genocidal people. We've been talking about anti-racism. We're anti-racist and we're also anti-genocidists. Did I just speak a truth? I think I did. I think I did. And what if, thank you for the heart. What if when we talk to people, going back to Audel, what can we say? What are some of the things that we can say, right? When we talk to folks, like when they say, I'm not a racist. What if we can claim I'm an anti-genocidist? What is that? What are you talking about? then you can take the level from also the conversation from the level of interpersonal to structural, right? Not only in my interpersonal interactions am I trying to promote equity. Let's say that's part of the conversation. But I'm also concerned about the treatment of whole peoples. Whole peoples. And that's why I go on these plunges. That's why I take these long trips. That's why I sit on the train tracks at Auschwitz. That's why I'm a member of ZPI, because I know that in any moment, just like any other human being, I could be swept up in a flurry of untruths about other people and called on to respond violently. I don't want to do that. I don't want you to get swept up in that either. So I'm an anti-genocidist.
Just to say that's a Vajna lightning bolt that I gave you there.
I wondered what that was. Well, you've been dropping mics. Why, dropping every? Why not? Why not a lightning bolt?
Rajna.
Yeah, because
Cutting a vine.
authoritarianism is on the rise throughout the world. So pay attention. Bobby, it's good to see you. Is there anything that you'd like to offer?
Sherry has her hand up.
Oh, Sherry. Hey, Sherry.
Hi.
Hi.
I bit. Oh, boy. I joined ZPI so I could go to the racial plunge. And that was after almost a year with our Sangha, we're all white, put together a white affinity group, a subgroup of those of us who are interested in doing reading around Black Lives Matter and historical things. So at the time that I went to the plunge, I'd probably done almost a year's worth of reading and meeting every week and talking. And a lot of the things that have come up here, especially how to attract, Blacks to our group. And I did read your article in Lions Roar, by the way. Thank you for that. I shared that. But every time I come, like I was at the other call, I really asked for more. I'm just there's so much more. It's just like peeling away so many layers. And right now it's like, I feel like feel like that there's some really core truths that are happening through this discussion today. The whole thing about genocide. Anyway, I guess I just wanted to let you know I'm listening. I'm taking it in. I keep coming back. I'm never really quite sure. My approach lately has been to be more on develop relationships if I can. And that has been working with Black people that I've encountered in my life and reaching out and doing more building relationship. And that seems like something I can do. So I'm not really even sure what it is that I have no question. I guess it's just, maybe I do question. It's like leaving today. All these ideas are here. It's just all this is going on. I need some time to settle and think and reflect. But it's like I'm still always wondering what else is there, what else is there? But I just keep showing up. And then the question is, what else is there that I can act on, in my life, in my everyday life? And you've given me a lot of ideas and you wanted a question. So that's it. I don't really expect an answer, but that's kind of where I am right now. It's like how to integrate all of this into like the next thing I personally can do in my life.
Thank you. Thank you, Sherry. We're coming to a close. maybe Audel would like to say something in response to you, Sherry. Maybe not, but Audel, maybe if you have a closing comment, and then Mioshin can close us out. And I'll just say thank you all for our time together. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Sherry, I actually think you answered your own question, by focusing on the next thing that you can do, because that is right. That's something that I sometimes get caught up in, is the overwhelmingness of, oh, what else can we do? There's so much more. And then I remind myself, this didn't happen overnight. Genocide didn't just happen like that, right? It takes years to develop. And we usually look backwards and say, oh, it started here, this one event. Hopefully by now you don't agree with that anymore, that definition. But yeah, Sherry, I'm going to take that. I'm going to frame it that way. Like, what else is there? And then what can I do right now? Always come back to now. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for this rich experience that we shared together. Ayo and Audel, wonderful, wonderful presentation. I'd like to add to Sherry, one thing I, as a person of color, appreciate is for, regardless of race, just stand up for each other. And I just shared a link, Hollerback. They provide training on how to stand up for each other, especially when we're on, for example, in a white crowd, and there's a person saying comments against a colored person. Then other people can stand up for that person, be anti-racist against racism. So you can stand up for each other. And, it's not just whiteness, I don't think, because I was invited to a Black church choir, and my son and I went, and we were afraid because they did not like us being there. They were like looking at us like, what are you doing here? But we're like, we were invited. So it's just, it doesn't matter what color it is, it's racism is racism. I mean, we're all racist, I think, at the same time we're anti-racist. And we have to realize our racist, proclivity in order to become anti-racist, I think. So I don't know if you agree, but that's just my take on that. And I just want to thank you all so much, and for Ayo and Audel. I know how busy you both are, and just giving us this offering, we're so grateful.